Billionaire CEO's only son last wish to black janitor. Her action strange. 5-year-old Dennis Strand sat weakly on his hospital bed, his tiny fingers gripping the white blanket as machines beeped softly around him. The air smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. Across from him, his father, Rodney Strand, a billionaire CEO known for his sharp business mind, looked nothing like the confident man the world knew. His eyes were swollen, his suit unkempt, and his hands trembled as he leaned closer to his son. By the door stood a janitor, an older black woman named Mrs. Brooks, holding onto her mop handle like it was the only thing keeping her steady. She had cleaned this hospital for years, but tonight was different. The boy's small voice broke the silence. He whispered something that made his father freeze. Rodney's lips trembled as he turned to Mrs. Brooks. "He wants you," he said quietly. "It's his last wish." Mrs. Brooks blinked, unsure she heard him right. "Me?" Rodney nodded, tears rolling down his face. Whatever Dennis had asked for wasn't about toys, money, or fame. It was something deeper, something only this janitor could give. What she did next left everyone in the room completely speechless. What could a dying 5-year-old boy possibly ask from a janitor that a billionaire father couldn't provide? Tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories like this one. Tomorrow we're dropping another story you won't want to miss. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. For 17 years, Mrs. Brooks had walked the same polished corridors of Premier Medical Center in downtown Chicago. Every night, after the last visitor left and the laughter in the waiting rooms faded, she pushed her cleaning cart from floor to floor, making sure every corner shone. She took pride in her work. To her, cleanliness wasn't just a job, it was her contribution to the fight for life that took place inside those walls. She often said that clean floors meant fewer infections, fewer tears, and more chances for recovery. At 55, her back sometimes ached, and her knees protested each climb up the service stairs, but she never complained. The hospital was her second home. It had been since the day she took the job to support her 2 children after her husband left. With every mop stroke and every wiped surface, she had paid for school shoes, rent, and eventually, college tuition. Her daughter, Alana, was now a registered nurse working the day shift on the 3rd floor of the same hospital. Her son, Marcus, was in Colorado studying environmental science at the University of Boulder. Both were living proof that long hours and faith could build something out of nothing. Her colleagues respected her quiet strength. She never missed a shift, even during snowstorms or holidays. On Christmas Eve, while others gathered around their trees, she worked double shifts so her younger co-workers could go home early. She was the type who packed leftover sandwiches for the night nurses and left thank you notes for orderlies who helped move heavy equipment. Her world was small but filled with meaning. Across the city, Rodney Strand lived in a world defined by glass walls and skyline views. At 32, he was the CEO of Strand Pharmaceuticals, a company his grandfather had started with a single pharmacy in Detroit 70 years earlier. Rodney had expanded it into a global name, employing over 50,000 people. His office on the top floor of a tower overlooking Lake Michigan reflected his precision and control. Everything about his life was measured, scheduled, and efficient. He had grown up in privilege but carried the pressure of legacy. Every deal he closed, every speech he gave, was broadcast across business networks. He had married young and divorced early, his work always taking priority. The only person who ever broke through his business-first armor was his son, Dennis. The boy had his mother's soft eyes and his father's curious mind. Dennis loved animals, cartoons, and strawberry milkshakes. He had once spent entire afternoons chasing pigeons at Navy Pier and feeding giraffes at the Lincoln Park Zoo. That changed 18 months ago when Dennis began showing signs of a rare illness doctors struggled to identify. What started as fatigue and frequent fevers turned into weakness and constant hospital stays. By the time they found a name for the disease, his body had already begun to fail him. Since then, the hospital had become his entire world, the 8th floor, in particular, his universe. Rodney's penthouse near Lincoln Park felt empty now. The rooms filled with expensive furniture and cold silence didn't mean anything compared to the small hospital room where his son lay. He spent nights in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, reviewing company reports on his laptop while nurses adjusted fours. No amount of wealth could ease the helplessness he felt watching his child fade. Meanwhile, miles away in South Chicago, Mrs. Brooks's apartment told a different story. It was a modest 2-bedroom unit with walls covered in family photos and drawings her children made when they were young. A small potted plant sat by the kitchen window, and the hum of a refrigerator filled the silence. She often ate dinner standing up, watching the evening news before heading to her night shift. Despite her exhaustion, she felt proud each time she put on her uniform. Clean, pressed, and neat. 2 people, one at the top of the city skyline, the other near its edges, living entirely different lives yet walking the same hospital halls every evening. One entered through the front lobby, surrounded by assistants and security, while the other came in through the staff entrance, swiping her ID card with a tired smile. Both carried burdens the world couldn't see. Every night at Premier Medical Center, their paths crossed briefly, Rodney, lost in worry, barely noticing the janitor pushing her cart past the pediatric floor. She never lingered, always respectful of the family's privacy, but she saw more than most. She saw parents break down in corners, nurses fighting tears, and children smiling through pain. 17 years had taught her that hope and heartbreak shared the same hallways. She didn't know that soon, her quiet devotion would place her in the center of one family's deepest moment of need. And neither Rodney nor Dennis had any idea that the woman who mopped their floors every night would become the one person who could bring light back into their darkest days. 6 months before that cold December night, spring had just arrived in Chicago. The city was thawing from winter's grip, and the scent of rain clung to the air. Inside Premier Medical Center, however, the seasons hardly mattered. The same white walls, the same quiet hum of machines, the same tired faces. On the 8th floor, Dennis Strand had just endured another difficult round of treatment. His small body was exhausted, his eyelids heavy, but he refused to sleep. He wanted to watch the woman who came in every night with her mop and quiet smile. Mrs. Brooks had cleaned his room dozens of times before, always quietly, so as not to disturb him. But that evening, as she wiped the window ledge, she felt his eyes on her. When she turned, she saw him staring, his thin face curious beneath the tangle of 4 lines. "Why do you clean at night?" he asked softly, his voice barely stronger than a whisper. She smiled, surprised to hear him speak. "Because nighttime is when children like you sleep and get better," she said gently. "I make sure the rooms are clean so you can heal without any bad germs getting in the way." He blinked slowly, thinking about that. "So, you help kids too?" She nodded, still scrubbing. "In my own small way, yes. I may not wear a doctor's coat, but clean rooms help the doctors do their job right." Dennis seemed to like that answer. He watched her move around the room, her motions steady and practiced. After a few minutes, he asked another question. "Do you have kids?" Her hand paused on the mop handle. "Yes," she said, her voice softening. "A daughter and a son. They're both grown now. Can I see them?" She hesitated. Phones were supposed to stay in pockets on the floor, but the boy's tired eyes made it impossible to refuse. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to her favorite photos. She showed him a picture of her daughter, Alana, standing in front of the hospital in bright blue nursing scrubs. "That's my girl," she said proudly. "She works right here, just during the day." Dennis smiled weakly. "She looks nice." "She is. She works hard, just like her mama." She swiped to another photo. This one of Marcus, her son, standing on a snowy mountain with his arms stretched toward the clouds. And this one, she said, is my boy. That's the top of Mount Elbert in Colorado. He climbed all the way up there last year. Dennis's eyes widened. That's a real mountain. It sure is. The tallest in Colorado. He said it took a whole day to reach the top. The air was thin, and his legs felt like jelly, but he said it was worth it when he saw the view. The little boy stared at the photo for a long time. I wish I could climb a mountain someday, he whispered. Something in her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him that he would, that one day he'd stand somewhere beautiful, feeling the wind in his hair, but she couldn't lie. Instead, she walked closer and sat carefully on the edge of his bed, though she knew it broke hospital rules. You know, she said softly, my son told me the hardest part wasn't the climbing. It was believing he could do it before he even started. Every time he wanted to stop, he thought about how far he'd already come. That's what made him reach the top. Dennis smiled faintly, his small hands clutching the blanket. Did he take pictures from up there? He did, she said. He said the clouds looked like pillows and the sun felt close enough to touch. The door opened quietly. Rodney walked in, holding a cup of coffee, his face drawn with worry. At first, he froze at the sight of the janitor sitting on his son's bed. Hospital protocol flashed in his mind, but before he could say anything, Dennis laughed, a small, fragile sound that filled the room. Rodney stopped. He hadn't heard that sound in weeks. He stood silently by the doorway, watching his son's face light up as Mrs. Brooks described mountain trails and wind-whipped snow. When she noticed him, she quickly stood and adjusted her uniform. I'm sorry, sir, she said, her tone respectful. I was just keeping him company. Rodney shook his head slowly. No, don't apologize. His voice was quiet, almost uncertain. It's the first time he's smiled like that in a long while. She nodded, touched but professional. He's a sweet boy. Reminds me of my son at that age. Rodney didn't respond right away. He just looked at his son, smiling now, eyes half closed with peace, and then back at her. Something unspoken passed between them, a simple acknowledgement that compassion could sometimes reach places medicine couldn't. As she left the room, pushing her cart down the hall, she didn't realize that her small act of kindness had begun something that would change all their lives forever. After that spring evening, Mrs. Brooks found herself thinking about Dennis long after her shifts ended. His fragile smile stayed in her mind as she rode the bus home, her hand still smelling faintly of disinfectant. The next week, she made a quiet request to her supervisor to move her schedule from overnight shifts to early evenings. With 17 years on the job, she had earned enough seniority to choose her floor, and she specifically asked for the pediatric ward on the 8th floor. No one questioned it. Most staff knew she was dependable, and if she wanted a change, she had her reasons. From that point on, she timed her work so she could stop by Dennis's room while he was still awake. She'd bring her cleaning cart down the hall, humming softly, and his small face would light up the moment she appeared. "Miss Janitor," he'd call from his bed, waving weakly. She laughed every time. "You can just call me Miss J," she told him one evening, placing her hand over his. "It's shorter, and we're friends now." He nodded, testing the name like it was something precious. "Miss J," he repeated, smiling. Their short conversations turned into small rituals. She began bringing her phone to show him photos of Chicago, places he couldn't visit anymore. "This is Millennium Park," she'd say, showing him the bean reflecting the city skyline. "And this one's the Lincoln Park Conservatory. It smells like summer even in winter." Dennis loved the photos, asking endless questions about every building, every statue, every animal she mentioned. One day she showed him a picture of Buckingham Fountain lit up at dusk. It dances with music, she said, her voice animated. When I was little, my grandmother used to take me there after church on Sundays. We'd eat ice cream and listen to the water sing. Dennis closed his eyes, imagining it. What song did it sing? He asked quietly. She chuckled. All kinds. But my grandmother liked old ones, songs about hope and sunshine. Sometimes, when the monitors beeped in rhythm, she sang softly to him, gentle tunes passed down through her family. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was warm, and it filled the sterile hospital air with something real. Word spread quietly among the nurses. He smiles more when she's here, one of them whispered to another during rounds. They started scheduling her cleaning times so that Dennis would be awake when she came through. Even the doctors noticed a subtle difference. On her shift days, Dennis ate more and rested easier. His numbers on the chart improved, not dramatically, but enough to make everyone take note. Rodney noticed too. From his usual spot near the window, he watched his son laugh at her stories or fall asleep with a small smile on his face. He couldn't understand how this woman, with her worn shoes and simple uniform, managed to do what all the specialists in the country couldn't, bring light back into his son's life. During his late-night meetings with the medical team, he began adjusting his own schedule. Instead of stepping out during her visits, he stayed. He watched how she listened to Dennis, how she never rushed, how she seemed to speak directly to the child inside the illness, not the patient in the bed. Sometimes his gratitude overwhelmed him. One evening, as she was gathering her cleaning supplies, he stopped her at the door. "Miss Brooks," he said softly, "you've done more for my son than I can ever repay." She smiled politely. "I appreciate that, sir, but I don't do it for repayment." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope. "It's just a small token. Please take it." Her expression stayed calm, but her voice was firm. "I can't, Mr. Strand." "Why not?" he asked, surprised. "Because I don't do this for money," she said simply. "I do it because he's a child who needs kindness. That's something you can't buy, not from me or anyone else." For a moment, he said nothing. The businessman in him wasn't used to being refused. But the father in him understood. He folded the envelope back into his jacket, nodding slowly. "You're right," he said quietly. "Thank you." From that day, their respect for each other deepened. He stopped trying to pay her and instead made sure her breaks aligned with Dennis's visiting hours. It was a small gesture of gratitude, one she never mentioned but silently appreciated. As the weeks passed, her daughter Alana also became part of their routine. On her lunch breaks, she'd stop by Dennis's room, bringing children's books from the hospital library. Together, they read stories about faraway lands and brave explorers, and Dennis listened as though he were the hero of each tale. Marcus, still in Colorado, sometimes sent photos of mountains or sunsets, which she showed Dennis on her phone. "That's where my boy is today," she'd say proudly. Dennis loved hearing about Marcus's adventures, asking questions about the cold, the trees, and how it felt to breathe in the mountain air. Through these small exchanges, their bond grew into something that warmed the entire ward. She never crossed professional lines, never stayed too long or ignored her duties, but her presence became part of the rhythm of the floor. Nurses often said, "When Miss J's around, everything feels a little lighter." By summer's end, Dennis no longer called her Miss Janitor. He saved his smiles for her, his little stories, his whispered wishes. And though she never said it aloud, she began to think of him as one of her own, a child she could comfort, even if only for a little while. By November, the cheerful warmth that once filled Dennis's hospital room had dimmed. The treatments were no longer working the way everyone hoped they would. The doctors spoke more softly now, using careful words like comfort and palliative. Rodney sat through each meeting, his jaw tight, trying to absorb phrases that offered no real solution. Every new medication came with less promise than the last. He had spent millions on specialists, consultations, and experimental programs, but the truth was sinking in. His son was slipping away. Mrs. Brooks felt the change too. She still came by every evening, still smiled as she pushed her cart into the room, but even Dennis's laughter had softened. He was growing weaker. Some nights, he didn't even have the strength to lift his small toy truck from the bedside table. She noticed how often he stared out the window, watching the city lights twinkle below, lost in quiet thought. One night, as she adjusted the trash bin beside his bed, Dennis looked at her and asked, "Miss J, do you think people go to heaven when they stop being sick?" She froze for a second, her hands gripping the handle of the cart. She looked toward Rodney, who was half asleep in the chair near the wall. He opened his eyes just long enough to give her a faint nod. He trusted her to answer. "I do," she said gently, sitting beside the bed. "I think heaven is a place where you don't hurt anymore, and where you get to see everyone you love again." Dennis frowned a little. "But what if I disappear? What if nobody remembers me?" Her heart ached. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing his hair from his forehead, "people don't disappear when we remember them. My mama passed away when I was young, but I still talk to her every day. I tell her about my kids, about my job, about the people I meet here. She's not gone from my heart, and you won't be gone from mine either." Tears gathered in her eyes as she spoke. He looked at her seriously. "You'll remember me." She took his hand, fragile and warm. "I promise," she said. "I will never forget you." He smiled faintly, comforted by her words. The next day, when she returned, he had a new request. "Miss J, can I see pictures of your grandkids?" She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I don't have grandkids yet," she said. "But I can show you something special." She pulled out her phone and showed him photos from Alana's nursing graduation. Dennis studied the smiling young woman in the blue cap and gown. "She looks like she makes people better," he said. "She does," Mrs. Brooks replied. "Just like the nurses here. She helps people heal." Dennis's eyes sparkled with admiration. "I think she's brave," he whispered. That evening, she brought him a small spiral notebook she had picked up from the gift shop downstairs. "This is for you," she said. "You can draw in it, or write things you want to remember." Dennis held it like a treasure. Together, during her breaks, they filled the pages with drawings. He sketched mountains, rivers, and zoos, places he dreamed of visiting. When he grew too tired to draw, he'd ask her to write for him. "Write, I want to see the ocean," he said one night. Another day, "Write, I want to ride a big wheel at Navy Pier." Each page became a record of the adventures he carried in his heart. One evening, Rodney stopped her in the hallway as she left Dennis's room. The light from the nurse's station glowed softly behind him. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you." She looked surprised. "You don't have to thank me, sir." He took a slow breath. "No, I do. You've given my son something no doctor could. Peace. He's not afraid when you're around. You talk to him like he's still a boy, not a patient. I think that means more than any treatment we've tried." Her eyes filled with emotion. "Mr. Strand, I've worked on this floor for 17 years. I've seen too many children fight battles they shouldn't have to. Each one of them stays with me. I remember their names, their faces, their laughter. Dennis is special, but he's not the first child who's taught me courage." He nodded slowly, his voice barely steady. "You must see a lot of pain." "I do," she said. "But I also see love. Parents who never stop hoping. Nurses who care long after their shifts end. Children who smile even when they're scared. That's what keeps me coming back. Rodney looked away, blinking back tears. For the first time in months, he realized that grief wasn't something to fight, it was something to share. He and Mrs. Brooks stood there in silence, united by the same helplessness, the same love for one little boy whose time was running out. From that night forward, the connection between them changed. There were no titles, no CEO, no janitor, just two people trying to make the world gentler for a child who deserved more time. They couldn't stop what was coming, but they could make sure Dennis's final days were filled with stories, laughter, and warmth. And together, they did exactly that. 2 weeks before Christmas, the hospital corridors were strung with paper snowflakes and faded tinsel garlands, but inside room 812, the season felt far away. The machines that once beeped rhythmically beside Dennis's bed were now silent, replaced by the gentle hum of an oxygen concentrator. His body had grown frail, his cheeks pale as porcelain. Nurses moved softly around him, speaking in hushed tones. The doctors had said there was nothing more to do but keep him comfortable. Rodney spent every waking hour at his son's bedside. His world had shrunk to that small, sterile room, the white walls, the scent of antiseptic, the quiet rise and fall of Dennis's chest. He rarely left to eat, sleeping in the reclining chair beside the bed. He still signed documents for Strand Pharmaceuticals from his phone, but his focus was gone. Every number on the screen meant nothing next to the fragile boy lying in front of him. That evening, snow fell quietly outside the window, the city glowing in the distance. Dennis stirred weakly under the blanket, his lips moving without sound. Rodney leaned closer. "Dad," the boy whispered, barely audible. "Can you call Miss J?" Rodney frowned softly. "She's not on tonight, buddy. It's her day off. You want me to tell the nurse?" Dennis shook his head with surprising insistence. "No. You call her. Please." It wasn't the kind of plea Rodney could ignore. Within minutes, he had her number, one the hospital staff had given him for emergencies. He stepped into the hallway and dialed. When she answered, her voice was groggy but alert. "Mr. Strand? Is everything all right?" "Dennis is asking for you," he said quietly. "I'm sorry to bother you. It's late." There was a brief pause. "I'll be there," she said simply. 30 minutes later, the door opened and she stepped inside, still wearing her winter coat and knit hat. Her hands were red from the cold. She'd rushed straight from her apartment in South Chicago, not even stopping for gloves. She looked tired but composed, her eyes full of concern. Dennis's face brightened when he saw her. "Miss J," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "You came." "I told you I would," she said softly, setting her purse down and moving closer to the bed. "What's all this about, sweetheart? You got me running out in the snow." He smiled faintly, then looked toward his father. "I have something important." Rodney sat beside him, holding his small hand gently. "Go ahead, son. Miss J's here." Dennis's voice was so soft that Rodney had to lean in to hear. "I want Miss J to use my treasure, to help other kids like her grandkids." Both adults froze. "Your treasure?" Rodney asked gently. "What treasure, buddy?" Dennis lifted a trembling finger toward the nightstand. There, beside a stuffed bear, lay his small spiral notebook, the one Miss J had given him weeks earlier. Rodney picked it up carefully and opened the cover. Inside, written in uneven, shaky 5-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My treasure for Miss J's grandkids." Tears filled Rodney's eyes before he could stop them. "Oh, son," he murmured. "Miss J doesn't have grandkids yet." Dennis frowned faintly. "She will. Someday. And other kids too. Kids like me, who don't get better." The room went quiet except for the soft hiss of oxygen. Miss J covered her mouth, struggling to hold back tears. "Baby, you don't have to think about that," she said gently. "You just rest. That's what matters." But Dennis shook his head with surprising determination. "No. I want to help. You said remembering makes people stay. So if people remember me, they'll help other kids. Right?" She nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, sweetheart. They will." Rodney's voice cracked as he asked, "What kind of help, Dennis?" The child took a shallow breath. "Like school. Like college. For kids whose moms and dads clean or cook or fix things. Like Miss J." Miss J gasped softly. "Oh, honey." He continued, whispering between breaths. "She's good, Dad. She helps people even when nobody looks. Her kids should have everything." Rodney swallowed hard. He understood then. Dennis wasn't talking about toys or gifts. He was talking about a legacy. The kind of goodness that outlives pain. Miss J wiped at her eyes. "Dennis, you don't need to worry about such big things. You just rest now." But he persisted, gripping her hand with fragile fingers. "Promise me. You'll take care of the other kids. Both of you." Rodney leaned forward, his tears falling freely now. "We promise, son. We'll take care of them." Miss J, sobbing quietly, placed her other hand over theirs. "I promise too, baby. I'll make sure the other kids are okay." Dennis sighed contentedly, his hand still enclosed between theirs. "Good," he whispered. "That's my treasure." Within minutes, he drifted into sleep, his breathing slow and shallow. Rodney and Miss J remained at his bedside, still holding his hand, neither of them willing to let go. The snow outside kept falling, blanketing the city in silence. In that quiet hospital room, a child's final wish had been spoken, a wish that would soon change the lives of hundreds of children they hadn't even met yet. 3 days after that snowy night, on December 18th, Dennis Strand slipped away quietly in his sleep. Rodney was beside him, holding his small hand, whispering words that faded into the still air. The nurses said he went peacefully, no pain, no struggle, just a long exhale that never returned. The hospital staff stood silently in the hallway as the gurney passed. For weeks afterward, the pediatric wing felt heavier, as though the air itself carried his absence. Rodney stayed in that room for hours after the monitors went dark. He touched every drawing, every photograph taped to the walls. He folded Dennis's blanket himself, unwilling to let anyone else near it. When Miss J arrived later that morning, she didn't say a word. She simply stood by his side, both of them staring at the empty bed. There were no right words to speak, only quiet understanding. The funeral took place 4 days before Christmas at a small church in Lincoln Park. The pews were filled with family, close friends, business partners, and hospital staff who had watched the boy fight for so long. Snow fell steadily outside the stained glass windows, dusting the steps in white. The choir sang softly, and the scent of pine mixed with candle wax filled the sanctuary. Rodney sat in the front row, his hands clenched together, his expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken much since that morning. Behind him sat Miss J, wearing her best navy blue dress, the one she usually reserved for church. Her daughter, still in her nursing uniform, held her hand tightly. They didn't know what to say to a man who had lost everything, but being there felt right. After the service, Rodney approached them quietly near the exit. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded. He was a special boy. Rodney looked at her for a long moment, as though considering something he hadn't yet found the courage to say. Then he gave a small nod and walked away, promising to call her soon. A week later, that call came. He asked her to come to his office, Strand Pharmaceutical headquarters, on the 42nd floor of Meridian Tower. She'd never been to a place like that before. The building's marble lobby gleamed beneath the winter light, and a receptionist looked surprised to see a woman in a janitor's coat walk in. But when she gave her name, she was ushered up immediately. Rodney stood by the window of his office when she entered. The view stretched across downtown Chicago, skyscrapers glinting in the sun. He turned, offered her a seat, and spoke with the calm precision of a man who'd spent a lifetime making decisions worth millions. Yet this one was personal. "Miss J," he began softly, "I've been thinking about Dennis's wish. About what he asked from us that night." She nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "I haven't stopped thinking about it either." He took a deep breath. "I want to honor him properly. So, I'm establishing something called the Dennis Strand Memorial Trust. It'll start with $20 million. Its purpose is to provide full college scholarships for children of service workers, janitors, maintenance staff, security guards, cafeteria employees, people like you, who keep everything running but rarely get seen." She stared at him, unsure she'd heard correctly. "Scholarships? For children like mine?" "Yes," he said, meeting her eyes. "For children of people who work hard, give their best, and don't get the recognition they deserve. It'll cover every Strand Pharmaceutical property in Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, Boston, and Miami, and Premier Medical Center too. Anywhere Dennis spent his time." Tears welled in her eyes. "That's a beautiful thing, Mr. Strand. He'd be proud." Rodney hesitated, then added quietly, "He also made one specific request, that you be part of it. He wanted you to take care of the other kids. I want you to be the trustee, Miss J. The voice that makes sure his wish is carried out exactly as he imagined it." Her breath caught. "Me?" He nodded. "Yes. You." She looked down, shaking her head. "Sir, I clean hospital floors. I don't know anything about trusts or funds or whatever this is. You've got people, lawyers, accountants." "I do," he interrupted gently. "But none of them knew my son like you did. None of them gave him peace in his last months. Dennis trusted you, and so do I. You don't need to understand finance. You just need to understand people, and you do that better than anyone I've met." She sat silently for a moment, overwhelmed. The idea of being responsible for something so large terrified her. "I don't think I'm worthy of that kind of trust," she said finally. Rodney smiled faintly. "You've spent 17 years helping others without expecting a thing in return. You raised your children to be good, strong people. Dennis saw that. He knew kindness when he felt it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "He was the kind one, Mr. Strand. I just tried to make him smile." Rodney leaned forward. "And you did. That's why this is right. You'll ensure we help families like yours, with honesty, compassion, and dignity." She sat in thought for a long moment, the hum of the city below filling the silence. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I'll do it," she said, "but on one condition." He looked intrigued. "Name it." "I want to meet every single family myself," she said. "Not just their names on paper. I want to look them in the eye, explain what this means, and make sure they understand Dennis's heart. I want them to feel like part of something, not charity, but community." Rodney's eyes softened. That's exactly what he would have wanted. They shook hands, an unlikely pair bound by the memory of a little boy who'd seen more clearly than most adults ever could. Outside, the winter sun broke through the clouds, casting a quiet glow over the skyline. It felt, for the first time in months, like hope. January brought bitter cold to Chicago, but Miss J barely felt it. She had packed a small suitcase, her worn Bible, and Dennis's notebook, the one with his shaky handwriting and childlike drawings. Her daughter had insisted she take a warm scarf, while her son wired her a little extra money just in case. She told them not to worry. She wasn't doing this for herself. She was doing it for him, for the little boy who believed kindness should ripple far beyond a single hospital room. She had taken unpaid leave from the hospital. It wasn't an easy decision, but she knew her heart couldn't rest until she fulfilled Dennis's wish. For the next 2 months, she would travel to every place connected to Strand Pharmaceuticals and Premier Medical Center, personally delivering the message Dennis had left behind. She wanted to look into people's eyes, hear their stories, and tell them what that small boy had dreamed for their children. Her first stop was close to home, Premier Medical Center. The night shift had just ended when she walked into the cafeteria wearing her uniform, mop handle tucked under her arm. The staff were surprised to see her there on her day off. The janitors, cafeteria workers, and security guards gathered around, curious. She stood before them, clutching Dennis's notebook to her chest. "You all knew that little boy on the 8th floor," she began softly. "You saw him smile when most of us didn't think he could anymore. He's gone now, but before he passed, he made a wish. Not for toys, not for trips or fame, but for your children, for mine, for every one of us who works hard and keeps going even when no one sees us." Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. She opened the notebook, showing them Dennis's uneven handwriting, "My treasure for Miss J's grandkids." "This isn't charity," she said firmly. "It's a 5-year-old's dream, that the children of working people should have the same chances as anyone else. College, training, opportunities, he wanted that for them." The room was silent. Some of the men and women bowed their heads, others quietly wiped tears from their cheeks. When she finished speaking, the hospital administrator, who had come down to listen, announced that the trust was already active. Within months, applications would open for full scholarships. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was heartfelt, filled with relief and disbelief. A week later, she boarded a plane for Dallas. She hadn't traveled in years, and her hands shook as she held her ticket. Strand Pharmaceuticals Distribution Center sat on the edge of the city, surrounded by warehouses and delivery trucks. She met the maintenance crew in their break room after the morning shift. Some had grease on their uniforms, others smelled faintly of motor oil. She spoke to them the same way she had in Chicago, simple and sincere. One woman lingered afterward, a single mother in her late 30s, still wearing a faded baseball cap. She told Miss J her son had dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, but had recently dropped out of school plans to work construction full-time. College was out of reach. Miss J opened the notebook again and showed her Dennis's words. "Your son's dream isn't gone," she said softly. "It's waiting for this chance." The woman covered her mouth, shaking as tears fell. Phoenix was next. The Arizona sun was bright, and she found herself in a bustling cafeteria filled with the aroma of grilled food and coffee. She gathered the staff between shifts, some sitting, others standing near the walls. Among them was a cafeteria worker named Elena, whose twin daughters were top of their math class but had resigned themselves to attending community college because money was tight. Miss J sat with her during lunch, explaining how the scholarship worked. Elena clasped her hands together. "I always tell them to dream," she whispered. "Now maybe I can stop feeling like I lied." Boston came after that, a city colder than she expected. She met a security guard named Robert, a quiet man with tired eyes. His son was autistic, gifted with computers, but he needed specialized support programs that cost more than Robert made in a year. Miss J showed him Dennis's notebook and the official documents from the trust. For the first time in years, the man smiled. "He always says computers make sense when people don't," Robert said. Maybe now the world will make a little sense for him too. By February, she reached Miami. The warmth there was a relief, but the stories were no lighter. At the Strand offices near Little Haiti, she met Jean-Paul, a janitor who worked nights. His daughter, Mireille, had dreamed of medical school her whole life but was preparing to become a dental assistant instead. "It's cheaper, faster," he told her. When Miss J explained Dennis's wish, he sank into a chair, covering his face. "Tell this boy's father, thank you," he murmured. "He don't know what he done for us." At every stop, she carried Dennis's notebook with her. Its cover was worn now, its pages bending at the corners. Inside were drawings of mountains, animals, and stick figures labeled Miss J, Dad, and me. She'd lay it open on the table each time, letting people see that the heart behind this massive trust belonged to a little boy with crayons, not a boardroom full of executives. Many cried. Some didn't believe it at first, suspicious it might be a scam. She never grew frustrated. Instead, she listened, explained carefully, and showed the signed documents bearing Strand's company seal. When they finally believed her, the disbelief turned into gratitude so raw it often left her speechless. She began collecting stories. Every family she met had a struggle, a dream, a child standing at the edge of something they thought was impossible. She wrote each name in a small leather-bound notebook beside Dennis's drawings, noting their hopes and the obstacles they faced. Each conversation felt sacred, as though she was kneeling at the edge of something greater than herself. By the end of February, her savings were nearly gone, but her heart was full. She had fulfilled the first promise, to tell Dennis's story herself. What she didn't yet realize was that her mission had only just begun. She wasn't simply delivering scholarships. She was building something much larger, something alive. Nobody could have predicted what she did next. Instead of limiting her role to distributing scholarships, she began weaving something far more human, a network of love and remembrance in Dennis's name. With a borrowed laptop and a determination that defied her age, she started connecting the families she'd met across Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, Boston, and Miami. Every month, she hosted online gatherings where parents shared updates about their children's progress. It started small, just a few hesitant faces on a screen, but soon grew into something beautiful. A mother in Dallas spoke about her son being accepted to Texas A&M's veterinary program. The Phoenix twins she'd once met in a cafeteria now proudly announced their engineering scholarships at Arizona State. The Boston security guard's autistic son had just started computer science at MIT, while in Miami, the Haitian janitor's daughter sent photos from her first week of pre-med at the University of Florida. Each story filled her with both pride and humility. She always said the same thing at the start of every call: "This isn't my work. This is Dennis's dream." Her daughter soon joined her efforts, using her nursing connections to mentor students interested in healthcare careers. Together, they built a network of volunteers, nurses, teachers, and counselors, who guided the scholarship recipients through their college journeys. Then came her most touching creation, Dennis's Dream Days. Every few months, families across the 5 cities gathered to volunteer at children's hospitals, reading books to patients, organizing art activities, or simply sitting with lonely kids who needed company. Watching those gatherings, she often saw echoes of her time with Dennis, tiny hands clutching books, laughter echoing through hospital corridors once heavy with sadness. When Rodney saw what she'd built, he was stunned. The trust had started as a financial gift, but she had turned it into a living, breathing community. These families didn't just receive assistance. They gained belonging, mentorship, and shared purpose. The media eventually caught wind of it. A feature in the Chicago Tribune described her as the janitor who turned grief into opportunity. Television producers requested interviews, but she declined most of them. Whenever she did speak publicly, she redirected attention from herself. "Dennis is the reason," she would say. The rest of us are just carrying the torch he lit. When a publisher approached her with a lucrative book deal, she politely refused. Instead, she partnered with an education nonprofit to create a free guide for working families, helping janitors, cafeteria workers, and maintenance staff understand college financial aid and scholarship options. The goal, she said, is to make sure Dennis's dream keeps spreading, even to families we haven't met yet. Despite managing the trust, she kept her janitorial job for 3 more years. The hospital staff often found her cleaning floors late at night, then catching a few hours of sleep before hosting a video call with families from another city. She never accepted a salary for her trustee role. "This isn't work," she told Rodney once. "This is love." 5 years later, the dream had grown beyond anyone's expectations. More than 500 families gathered in Chicago for the anniversary celebration of the Dennis Strand Memorial Trust. Scholarship recipients, now in college, shared stories of how their lives had changed. Some were studying medicine, others education, engineering, and social work. Many had returned to mentor younger recipients. Rodney took the stage that day, his voice steady but full of emotion. "My son lived only 5 years," he said, "but because of him, and because of one woman's compassion, thousands of futures are brighter. This is what love does when it refuses to fade." After the applause faded and the hall emptied, she made her way quietly to Graceland Cemetery. She carried Dennis's original notebook, now carefully preserved, and placed it on his headstone. Around it, she spread printed photos of every scholarship recipient. There were hundreds of faces, smiling, hopeful, alive with purpose. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I kept my promise, sweet boy. The other kids are taken care of." Years passed, and she finally retired at 60. By then, the trust had supported more than 600 students through college. Her own grandchildren, her daughter's 2 children, were growing up in a world shaped by Dennis's legacy. When asked once why she didn't just distribute the funds and move on, she smiled gently and said, "Dennis didn't just want kids to go to college. He wanted them to feel seen, to know someone believed in them. That's what I did for him, and that's what I promised to do for them." And with that quiet faith, she turned what could have been a one-time act of charity into a movement of hope, one born from a child's dream and a janitor's heart that never stopped believing in it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. We share real stories that remind us what compassion, courage, and human connection can truly mean. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what part of this story resonated with you most. We read every message and love hearing your thoughts. Your likes, comments, and support help us keep telling the stories that matter. Join us tomorrow for another powerful story that will open your heart and challenge how you see the world.